Welcome back to Us the Podcast, where we revisit the cases that time almost forgot. The disappearances that linger in flyers, in databases, and in the hearts of families who refuse to stop hoping. Picture a single photograph. A 3-year-old girl in a crisp white sailor dress, dark hair and pigtails, smiling with that innocent gap between her two front baby teeth. That image, taken sometime in early 1983, became the face of a mystery that would stretch across more than 4 decades. Her name was Michelle Marie Newton. Little Shelley, to the people who loved her. On April 6, 1983, she vanished from Louisville, Kentucky, along with her mother, Debra Newton. This isn't a story about a stranger in the night, or a shadowy figure lurking in a parking lot. This is a parental abduction, one of the most heartbreaking and complicated categories of missing child case there is. And for reasons we're about to walk through, it stayed cold for 42 years, until modern forensics, a single anonymous tip, and the quiet persistence of a father who never gave up, brought the whole thing into focus. Let's go back to the beginning. Spring 1983. Ronald Reagan in the White House, Flashdance on the radio, and in the blue-collar neighborhoods of Louisville, life moving at a steady, predictable rhythm. Joseph Newton, everyone called him Joe, was 33. Hard-working, steady job. Young family. He and his wife Deborah had been married several years. Their daughter Michelle had arrived on October 5, 1979, and she was the center of their world. Friends described Shelley as bright, curious, always ready with a hug. She loved her little sailor outfits, her stuffed animals, riding on her father's shoulders during neighborhood walks. That spring, the Newtons were planning a big change. Joe had a job opportunity down in Georgia, warmer weather, lower cost of living, a fresh start. Deborah was excited. She told Joe she'd go down first, get an apartment set up, have everything ready by the time he followed. On the morning of April 2, 1983, Deborah packed a suitcase, buckled 3-year-old Michelle into the car, kissed Joe goodbye, and promised to call the second they were settled. "We'll be waiting for you," she said, according to the statement Joe later gave police. Michelle waved from her car seat, still in her favorite outfit, with no idea how final that wave was about to become. Joe stayed behind to give notice at work, handle the sale of the house, tie up the loose ends of uprooting a life. He expected a call that evening, maybe the next day. "We made it. It's small, but it'll do." Then the plan would fall into place. The call never came. Days turned into a week. Joe tried the number Deborah had left for a rental in Clayton County, Georgia. Nothing, no answer, no forwarding information. He called friends and relatives in the area, asking if anyone had seen her car, a modest sedan with Kentucky plates. No one had. Worry turned into dread. Joe went to the Louisville police. At first they treated it as a domestic matter, maybe a marital spat, a temporary separation. Parental abductions were common enough in the early 80s, and plenty resolved themselves once emotions cooled. But as weeks became months, the tone shifted. By late spring, the Jefferson County Sheriff's Office opened a formal missing persons investigation. Bulletins went out for Debra Newton, 24, and her daughter Michelle Marie Newton, 3. Flyers went up in truck stops, post offices, and churches across Kentucky and into Georgia. A young mother and her toddler, last seen leaving for what was supposed to be a family relocation. Joe cooperated with everything. Gave detectives every detail he could remember: the last conversations, the planned route down I-75, the name of the apartment complex Deborah had mentioned. He drove to Georgia himself, knocked on doors in Clayton County, showed photos to strangers. Nothing. Then, sometime between late 1984 and early 1985, came the first real blow. Deborah called Joe one last time. The conversation was brief, tense. According to the police summary released later, she offered no explanation for the silence. No location, just a few words before the line went dead. After that, nothing. No more contact, no sightings. The trail evaporated. In the summer of 1985, a Jefferson County grand jury indicted Deborah on charges of custodial interference, a felony in Kentucky, with no statute of limitations when a child is taken out of state. The FBI got involved, issuing an unlawful flight to avoid prosecution warrant. For a period, Deborah's name landed on the Bureau's most wanted list for parental kidnapping, a rare distinction that put her face on posters in federal buildings nationwide. Even that spotlight faded eventually. Tips came in a woman matching her description in Atlanta, another in Florida, and each one checked out negative. Age progression sketches of Michelle, created by the National Center for Missing and Exploited Children, showed a girl who might have grown into a teenager with her mother's eyes and her father's smile. Those circulated too. Years rolled on without answers. That last phone call, in the winter of '84 or early '85, was the final thread anyone could grasp. After it, the silence was total, literally and figuratively. No calls, no postcards, no whispered sightings in some small town somewhere. For Joe, that silence was louder than any scream. Back in Louisville, the sheriff's office kept the file open, technically active, in the way cold cases usually are. Checked once a year, dusted off whenever a new tip came in, otherwise left to gather quiet dust in a metal cabinet. Detectives assigned to the case rotated in and out, read the thick folder, and shook their heads at how ordinary the disappearance looked on paper. A mother, a child, a planned move, a sudden break in contact, no ransom note, no witness to a struggle, no blood. Just absence. The first serious investigative push came right after the 1985 indictment. Detectives drove down to Clayton County, canvassed apartment complexes along the boulevard Deborah had mentioned, showed photos to leasing agents, checked utility companies. Nothing. No lease under her name, no power turned on, no trace of the Kentucky sedan. They widened the search: Atlanta, Macon, Savannah, every major city along the I-75 corridor. Georgia troopers were asked to watch for the vehicle. The National Crime Information Center listed Deborah and Michelle as fugitive and missing person. For a stretch in the late '80s, the case made it onto a national television crime segment and into mailer flyers sent to post offices across the Southeast. The age-progressed image of Michelle at 8 wide eyes, shy smile, unmistakably her mother's daughter, brought in thousands of tips. Almost all of them were dead ends. A woman in Chattanooga thought she saw Deborah waitressing at a diner. Negative. A girl matching Michelle's description was spotted at a county fair in Alabama. Negative. A neighbor in Florida swore a quiet mother-daughter pair had just moved in next door. Negative. Again, every false lead cost time, money, hope. Joe drove to a lot of those locations himself, sat outside addresses, watched women walk past grocery stores, hoping one of them would turn and show him the face he'd last seen kissing his daughter goodbye. He never stopped. In a 1986 local television interview, his voice cracked on camera. "Wouldn't you want your child back? At least to know she's safe." He kept Michelle's room exactly as it was, toys on the shelf, crib still assembled waiting for a door that might one day open. Meanwhile, under a different name, across state lines, life went on for the woman once known as Debra Newton and the little girl once called Shelley. Routines, memories, a quiet, ordinary existence. And for Joe, and for the investigators who periodically opened the drawer, one question sat unanswered. Where were they? By the early '90s, tips had slowed to a trickle. The case slipped off the news. The FBI quietly pulled Deborah from its wanted list attention, had moved on to newer, more violent crimes. Joe kept searching in his own quiet way. He never remarried. Michelle's room stayed untouched, stuffed animals lined up on the dresser. A small pair of pink sneakers still by the door. In the rare interview he gave, it was always the same line: "I just want to know she's okay. I don't care about anything else." Then came the procedural blows. In 2000, the Jefferson County Commonwealth's Attorney's Office dismissed the 1985 indictment without prejudice, a technical move, because prosecutors couldn't locate Joe to testify. He'd moved a couple of times over the years and hadn't kept his contact information current with the court. It wasn't an exoneration of Deborah. It was paperwork catching up with time. Because there was no statute of limitations, the felony could be reindicted whenever the case moved again. 5 years after that, in 2005, Michelle's name quietly dropped off the National Center for Missing and Exploited Children's active database. Policy allowed cases with no credible leads and no evidence of foul play to be archived. Michelle Marie Newton was no longer considered an active missing child, presumed either safe under a new identity or not alive at all. That second possibility was never said out loud. It didn't need to be. Joe found out months later when he called to check on the status of the age-progressed photo. The woman on the phone explained it gently. He was devastated. They took her off the list, he told a cousin, like she never existed. But he never stopped believing she was out there. The years ground on. 2010, 2012, 2014, cold case units in Louisville reviewed the file during their annual audits, ran Deborah's name through new databases, credit reports, driver's license records, social security traces. Nothing. Queries went out to Florida, to Georgia, even to the Postal Service for change of address records. Every search came back blank. Then, in late 2015, a small crack appeared. A distant relative of Deborah's, someone who'd stayed in loose contact with the family, reached out to the sheriff's office. She'd seen a news segment about a woman arrested in Tennessee, an unrelated parental abduction case, and it jogged a memory. Years before Michelle disappeared, Deborah had once said, half joking, that if she ever needed to vanish, she'd go somewhere warm, somewhere quiet, somewhere with palm trees. Florida, maybe. Thin. Almost nothing. But it was enough for a detective named Mark Harlan to pull the physical file back out. Harlan was a veteran investigator who'd moved to cold cases after retiring from homicide. He didn't expect miracles, he just believed every case deserved a fresh set of eyes every decade or so. He started with the basics, re-interviewed Joe, now in his late 60s, still in the Louisville area, still telling the exact same story he'd told for 30 years. Harlan pulled the original grand jury transcripts, confirmed Joe's current address and willingness to cooperate, and in 2016 had prosecutors reissue the custodial interference warrant. The case was officially revived. From there, it entered a new phase: slow, methodical, digital. Harlan ran Deborah's name and social security number through every modern database he could reach. Facial recognition software, reverse image searches of the old photos, renewed inquiries to Florida. Nothing came back yet. But the file was breathing again. Meanwhile, the world around the case had changed. Investigative genetic genealogy was emerging, commercial DNA companies like Ancestry and 23andMe exploding in popularity. People finding long-lost cousins, uncovering family secrets they never expected. Law enforcement had started experimenting with matching crime scene DNA against public genealogy databases. In 2018, a serial offender who'd evaded capture for decades was finally identified through a distant relative's DNA sample. The technique was new, expensive, and controversial, but no longer science fiction. Harlan and his team talked about the possibility. There was no crime scene DNA here, no blood, no fingerprints, but there was a living relative. Deborah's sister Lisa, still in Louisville. If they ever landed on a credible suspect, a voluntary sample from Lisa could confirm or rule out anyone claiming to be someone else. A long shot. A very long shot. But in the spring of 2025, after nearly a decade of quiet digging, it paid off. The tip landed on Harlan's desk on a humid Tuesday in early May 2025. It came through a county Crime Stoppers line call logged at 3:17 p.m. on April 28. The caller, a woman who wouldn't give her name, spoke in the calm, practiced tone of someone who'd rehearsed exactly what she wanted to say. "I've been reading about old missing children cases online," she began. "There's one from Kentucky, 1983, a little girl named Michelle Newton, and her mother, Deborah. I looked at the age-progressed photo they made of the mother back then. And then I looked at a woman who lives in my community. Her name's Sharon Neely. She's in her mid-60s, quiet, keeps to herself. But when I put her picture next to the old one of Debra Newton, it's uncanny. I don't know if it's anything. I just thought someone should check." The dispatcher asked follow-up's description, any contact with the woman, but the caller kept it brief, gave an approximate street name in the retirement community, hung up, and disappeared back into anonymity. Harlan listened to the recording 3 times. He wasn't the type to get his hopes up. He'd chased plenty of lookalikes over the years. But this one felt different. It wasn't vague. It wasn't panicked. It named a real community, a real alias, and it referenced the exact thing that had always been the weakest part of the old case. No one had ever seen Deborah and Michelle together after 1983. The only bridge between then and now had always been photographs. He pulled the file and laid 2 images side by side on his monitor. On the left, the 1983 family photo that had been on every flyer. Deborah at 24. Dark hair parted in the middle, soft smile, eyes slightly downcast, shy in front of the camera. On the right, the 2010 age progression, estimating what she might look like at 54. Same dark hair. Imagine gray streak through it. Same gentle jawline. Same quiet expression. He pulled up county property records and typed in Sharon Neely. The name came right up. A modest villa in the Fenny section of the retirement community, purchased in 2011. No mortgage. Taxes paid on time. Utilities current. Date of birth listed as October 1960, 64 years old in 2025. Deborah's real birth date was July 1959. She'd have turned 66 that summer. Close, but not quite a match. The kind of small discrepancy someone building a new identity from scratch might leave behind. Harlan printed the record, circled the address, and called the local sheriff's office. "I've got a possible match on a parental abduction out of Kentucky," he told the detective, who picked up a woman named Carla Ruiz, nearly 2 decades into cold cases of her own. "Woman's been living under the name Sharon Neely. Can your people discreetly get a recent photograph? Nothing confrontational, a license photo, or a still off a community camera if you've got access." "We can do better than that," Ruiz said. "This community's got an active Facebook group, golf tournaments, book clubs, holiday parties. People post photos constantly. Give me a couple of days." 48 hours later, 3 photographs landed in Harlan's inbox. The first, from a 2023 4th of July picnic, a woman in a wide-brimmed sun hat near a grill, holding a plate of potato salad, smiling at the camera. The second, a clearer side profile from the same event, dark hair pulled back, faint crow's feet, the same gentle slope to the shoulders. The third, a driver's license scan. Ruiz had quietly pulled Sharon Neely, date of birth October 15, 1960, issued 2018. Harlan forwarded all 3 to a forensic imaging specialist at the Kentucky State Police Lab, who ran a facial comparison against the 1983 photo and the 2010 age progression. The result, a 92% similarity score against the age-progressed image. Not proof on its own. Facial recognition is probabilistic, but enough to justify digging further. Harlan flew to Florida the following week. He and Ruiz met in Ocala, drove the short distance to the community, and parked across from the quiet cul-de-sac where Sharon Neely's villa sat. They didn't knock. Not yet. They waited. On the 3rd day of surveillance, Friday, May 16th, Sharon came out to walk her small dog along the sidewalk. Ruiz photographed her through a long lens from inside the unmarked car. When Harlan compared the fresh images to the 1983 original, the resemblance wasn't subtle anymore. The cheekbones, The slight downward tilt of the mouth when she wasn't smiling. The way she carried her head. He felt the tightening in his chest that comes when a case stops being theoretical. Back in Louisville, he made the call he'd been building toward since 2015. Deborah's younger sister, Lisa, still lived in the house she'd grown up in on the east side of town. She'd been 21 in 1983, the aunt who used to babysit Michelle on weekends. She'd never stopped believing her sister was alive somewhere, as she'd never stopped feeling guilty that she hadn't seen it coming. Harlan sat with her at her kitchen table and laid out the photographs gently. "I need to be clear," he said. "We don't know anything for certain yet. But we have a woman in Florida living under a different name who looks a great deal like your sister. We'd need a DNA sample from you to compare. It's voluntary, you can say no." Lisa didn't hesitate. She opened a kitchen drawer and pulled out a small envelope she'd kept for years, a few strands of Deborah's hair, saved from a hairbrush after one of their last family dinners together, back in 1982. "I've been waiting for this day," she said. The next step required care. Florida law allowed investigators to obtain a reference DNA sample from a suspect in a nonviolent felony case if probable cause existed. Harlan drafted the affidavit, the photographic similarities, the matching description, the property records, the decades of case history. A county judge signed the order on June 4, 2025. 2 days later, a plainclothes detective knocked on Sharon Neely's door with a warrant for a buccal swab. She opened it in a light cardigan, looked at the badge, and said simply, "I figured this day would come eventually." She didn't resist. Let them take the swab. Signed the receipt, closed the door, and went back to her life like nothing had happened. Lisa's reference sample and Sharon's swab went to the Kentucky State Police Forensic Lab in Frankfort, prioritized because of the case's age and the attention it had once drawn. Analysts ran the standard short tandem repeat comparison. On July 11, 2025, the report landed in Harlan's inbox. The conclusion was unequivocal: a maternity match probability of 99.9997%. The DNA obtained from Sharon Neely's buccal swab was consistent with being the biological mother of Michelle Marie Newton, confirmed against the known relative sample from Lisa. No room left for doubt. Harlan called Joe that same afternoon. He answered on the second ring. "Mr. Newton," Harlan said, "we have a match. It's her. We found Deborah and we believe Michelle is still with her. She's alive." There was silence on the line so long Harlan thought the call had dropped. Then Joe's voice came through, thick and unsteady. "She's alive." He said it twice more, like he was testing whether the words would hold. The investigation moved quickly after that. Harlan coordinated with the local sheriff's office to prepare an arrest warrant for Debra Newton, also known as Sharon Neely, on the reindicted charge of custodial interference in the first degree, a felony. Federal jurisdiction was available since the child had been taken across state lines, but Kentucky wanted to handle it at home. They located Michelle's current identity the same quiet way they'd found her mother's. She was living in a different part of Florida under a name legally changed in the mid-90s. Public records showed a local high school diploma, work as a veterinary technician, an unremarkable, ordinary life. No criminal history, no indication, as far as investigators could tell, that she had any idea she'd once been born under a different name. The arrest was scheduled for Monday, November 24, 2025, the day before Thanksgiving. That morning dawned cool and clear. The kind of morning where retirees walk their dogs before the heat sets in, golf carts hum along the paths, and the air smells like cut grass and coffee brewing in open garages. At 9:42 a.m., Sharon Neely stepped out of her front door carrying a small canvas tote light blue cardigan, khaki capris, white sneakers, the standard uniform for a day of errands. Post office first, to mail holiday cards. Then the grocery store, for a modest Thanksgiving dinner she planned to eat alone. She never made it to either. Two unmarked cars had been parked at the end of the street since 8:30. In one sat Detective Carla Ruiz and a uniformed deputy named Travis Cole. In the other, Mark Harlan waited with a Kentucky State Police liaison who'd flown down the night before. Nobody in either car expected trouble. What they expected was shock and a long, quiet silence. As Sharon reached the end of her driveway, Cole stepped out first, hands visible, voice calm. "Ma'am, good morning. I'm Deputy Cole. Are you Sharon Neely?" She stopped walking. The tote hung motionless at her side. She looked at him, then past him toward the second car, then back. "Yes," she said. Steady, almost polite. "I have a warrant for your arrest out of Jefferson County, Kentucky, for custodial interference in the first degree. You're being taken into custody." For the first time, her composure slipped, not dramatically, just a small tightening around the eyes, a parting of the lips. She didn't run, didn't argue. She looked down at the driveway and said, very quietly, "I didn't do anything." A neighbor across the street, Harold Jenkins, 78, retired Air Force, had come out to water his hibiscus. He recognized the uniform, the two unmarked cars, and Sharon, the quiet woman who sometimes waved when he mowed his lawn. As Cole began reading the Miranda warning, Jenkins called out, half joking, half confused, "They're coming for you, Sharon." It got caught clean on the body camera audio. It would run on every local news segment in Florida and Kentucky for days afterward. Sharon never answered him. She let Cole cuff her hands behind her back. Ruiz stepped in to help guide her to the car, reciting the rest of the rights advisement. The only other thing Sharon said, during the walk to the car so quiet the body camera barely caught it, was, "I never meant for it to go on this long." She was booked at the county jail, fingerprinted, photographed, placed in a holding cell. Extradition paperwork went out within hours. A judge agreed to a video arraignment the next morning because of the holiday. Bail was set at $50,000 high for a nonviolent felony, but justified by 42 years of flight. While Sharon sat in holding, the second, far more delicate part of the operation began. Harlan had spent the previous week working with the Florida Department of Children and Families. Even though Michelle was now 46, the case still fell under long-term parental abduction protocols. A trauma-informed civilian liaison was chosen to deliver the news, a soft-spoken woman named Elena Morales, who had handled family reunifications on other cold cases before. Michelle, now legally Alexis Marie Carter, had a small apartment in Ocala, about 30 minutes away. She worked weekdays at an animal clinic, volunteered at a shelter on weekends, kept to herself. Neighbors called her kind, private, good with dogs. She'd never married, had no kids, rarely talked about her childhood beyond saying she and her mother had moved around a lot when she was young. Elena and a deputy knocked on her door at 11:15 that morning. Michelle answered in scrubs, hair in a loose ponytail, clearly not expecting company. "Miss Carter, my name is Elena Morales, with the Department of Children and Families. This is Deputy Ruiz. May we come in? We need to talk to you about something very important." She hesitated, then stepped aside. Inside, photos of dogs lined the walls. A half-decorated Christmas tree stood in the corner. Elena sat on the edge of the couch and spoke slowly. "There's no easy way to say this. We have reason to believe the woman you know as your mother, Sharon Neely, is actually named Debra Lee Newton, and that you, ma'am, were born Michelle Marie Newton in Louisville, Kentucky, on October 5, 1979. You were reported missing along with your mother on April 2, 1983, when you were 3 years old." Michelle's face went blank. Her breathing changed short, shallow. She looked between Elena and the deputy. "That's not possible," she said. "My mother told me my father died when I was a baby. That's why we moved." Elena opened a folder and laid out 3 photographs: the 1983 snapshot of little Shelley in the sailor dress, the 2010 age progression, and Michelle's own recent driver's license photo. "Look at them," Elena said gently. "Really look." Michelle's hand moved slowly toward the pictures. When her fingers touched the image of the toddler in the sailor dress, she flinched like it had burned her. "We have DNA results," Elena continued. "Your mother's sister, your Aunt Lisa, gave a sample. It matches you. You are Michelle Marie Newton. Your biological father, Joseph Newton, is still alive. He's been looking for you since the day you disappeared." The room went quiet, except for the hum of the refrigerator. Michelle didn't cry, not yet. She just sat with her hands folded in her lap, staring at the photographs as if they belonged to someone else's life. After a long silence, she asked the first real question. "Does he know?" "Yes, he knows you're alive. He's been told." She closed her eyes. When she opened them, she asked the question that would change everything. "Can I meet him?" The answer was yes. Because of the holiday, the reunion wasn't immediate. Michelle needed time, space, room to sit with the fact that the story she'd been told her whole life had been built on one enormous omission. In Louisville, Joe sat in his living room with the same photo he'd kept on the mantel for 42 years. The phone rang. It was Harland. "She wants to meet you." Joe's voice, when he found it, was barely a whisper. "When?" "Soon, as soon as she's ready." Thanksgiving was the next day. For the first time in 4 decades, Joe would set an extra place at the table, not out of hope this time, but out of certainty. The day after the arrest, Michelle sat alone in her apartment and stared at the ceiling for hours. The photographs Elena had left spread across her coffee table like pieces of a puzzle she'd never known existed. She didn't sleep, didn't eat, just let the facts settle in. When morning came, she called the number Elena had given her. "I want to talk to him." "My father." The first contact wasn't in person, it was a phone call, arranged for Wednesday afternoon, November 26. Elena sat with Michelle in Ocala. Harlan sat with Joe in Louisville. 2 phones, on speaker, 2,000 miles apart. Joe answered first. "Hello?" A pause. Then a woman's voice, soft, uncertain. "Hi, this is Michelle." Joe's breath caught audibly. He'd practiced this moment in his head 1,000 times over 40 years, and none of it prepared him for how it actually felt. "Michelle," he repeated, like the name itself was something sacred. "I've waited so long to hear your voice." They talked for 47 minutes. Not about the past, not yet. Small things. She told him she liked dogs, that she worked with animals every day. He told her he still lived in the same house, that the neighborhood had changed but the oak tree out front was still there, that he'd kept her room exactly the way she left it. She laughed small, surprised, and said she hoped the stuffed animals weren't too dusty. By the end of the call, they were both crying. Neither had expected to. Thanksgiving morning was overcast in Louisville. Joe woke early and cooked the same meal he'd cooked alone for 42 years: turkey, stuffing, green bean casserole, sweet potato pie. This time he set 2 plates. Michelle flew in that afternoon. She'd asked for privacy, no media, no crowd at the airport. Elena and Harlan met her, drove her to Joe's street, and parked a block away so she could walk the last stretch on her own. She stood on the sidewalk for almost a full minute, looking at a house she had no memory of. Then she walked up the driveway, climbed the 3 porch steps, and knocked. Joe opened the door. For a long moment, neither of them spoke. He saw the same dark hair, the same gentle eyes he remembered from 1983. She saw a man older than any photograph her mother had ever shown her: gray hair, tired lines around the mouth, and a soft smile she somehow already knew she was supposed to recognize. He reached out slowly. She stepped forward. They hugged carefully at first, then tightly, the way people hug when they're afraid the moment might disappear if they let go. "You're home," Joe whispered into her hair. "I didn't know I was missing," she whispered back. They spent the rest of the day in the living room. Joe showed her the photo albums he'd kept safe for 42 years. She told him about her life, the schools, the places she'd lived, the quiet routine she'd built for herself. She spoke about her mother without anger, only confusion. "She was good to me," Michelle said. "She was just my mom." Joe nodded. He didn't press. He just listened. The next day, Friday, November 28th, Michelle and Joe attended Deborah's arraignment in Jefferson County Circuit Court. She appeared by video from the Florida jail. In jail, issued orange, hair pulled back, face unreadable. The judge read the charge: custodial interference in the first degree, a felony. Deborah pleaded not guilty. Bond was continued. A preliminary hearing was set for early January. Michelle and Joe sat together in the gallery. When Deborah looked up and saw them, her eyes widened for several long seconds. She just looked at her daughter. Really looked, before the video feed cut out. Outside the courthouse, Michelle gave a short statement she'd written herself. "This is a complicated situation. I love the woman who raised me. I'm also getting to know my father. I hope both of them can find some peace. I'm not choosing sides, I'm just trying to understand." Deborah's attorney released a brief statement of her own. "My client is cooperating fully and looks forward to resolving this matter in court." The following week, the Jefferson County Sheriff's Office held a press conference. The sheriff called it a once-in-a-career resolution, praising Detective Harlan's persistence, the anonymous tip line, and the breakthrough of DNA technology. "This case shows that time doesn't always erase the truth," he said. "And families don't give up." In the months since, Michelle has been doing the slow work of rebuilding two lives at once. She visits Louisville, often walks in the park, dinners at the same diner Joe used to take her to as a baby, quiet evenings with old photo albums. She's kept her job in Florida, but started the paperwork to legally add her birth name back, Michelle Marie Newton Carter, a bridge between the two halves of her life. She talks to Deborah by phone sometimes. The conversations are careful, guarded, no easy answers, no full explanations yet. But there's contact. Maybe the beginning of something that could, one day, become understanding. As of this recording, the criminal case is still pending. Deborah remains in Florida awaiting extradition. Michelle and Joe are still building their relationship, one visit at a time. The little girl in the sailor dress isn't just a face on a flyer anymore. She's a woman in her 40s with a job, a father, and a complicated history she's still learning how to carry. And somewhere in Louisville, on a quiet mantle, that 1983 photograph still smiles. Only now the smile belongs to someone who's finally found her way home. Thank you for listening. If there are other cold cases out there still waiting for their breakthrough, remember, the trail may go cold, but it never truly disappears. Until next time.